All right, everybody. This is Battered Souls. I am Dylan Charles. Thank you for tuning in. I'm coming at you as always, or most of the time, from the fabulous Blue Ridge Mountains in Western North Carolina. And it's hot. It's hot, hot, hot. But I'm from Texas and I like it. I like it a lot. You can check out my work at dylancharlescoaching.com. I work with individuals. Oh my God, do some amazing stuff. If you want to hear more about that, just go in there, sign up to my newsletter, or book a free consultation call with me, and we can meet and find out if we may make some tremendous headway working together. I have been doing this podcast for the last few years, and in 2021, in August, almost exactly 2 years, 3 years ago, I had a gentleman by the name of Saul Luckman on the show, and he's back today. Saul is a lot of things. He might call himself a Renaissance man, or maybe he won't, but I think he fits into that category. He's a very creative, a polymath individual, someone who is capable of philosophy, art, sanity, common sense, and all the stuff that we need more of in this world. He's an author. His latest book is The World Cult and You, Your Place in It and Your Way Out of It. And his last book was Kali the Destroyer. We talked a little bit about that a few years ago. And of course, that was during the time of COVID, right in the thick of it. And to be honest, that feels like almost a lifetime or two ago. So much has changed just in the last few years. So he's back. We're going to talk about what's happening in the present moment. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. We're just going to see where it goes. He's a very interesting and fascinating human being out there. And I think his wisdom can help many of you out there just open your eyes, change your perception, and wake up a bit in the real sense of the word. You can find his work at saulluckman.substack.com. So do check that out. And without further ado, Mr. Saul Luckman, welcome to the Battered Souls podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dylan. It's good to reconnect.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that I know from back in the day when I was really putting a lot of time and energy into my website, wakingtimes.com. I haven't really been publishing it much there over the last couple of years. Every now and then I feel inspired to write an article. But I know you from back in the day, so you've been a very prolific writer of articles and books and that sort of thing. And your perspective and my perspective always align a great deal. And so, yeah, a lot has changed. I know that you and I both were very participatory in the struggle for truth and the interest in helping others see what's really going on in this world and how it really, really affects them and impacts their families. But to a degree, and this is kind of the root of this conversation here today, is we were talking online a couple of days ago or a couple of weeks ago, and just really like sharing the idea that we're sort of in the for you and myself, we're sort of in the post opinion era. In other words, it's we find it much more peaceful and satisfying to just observe. Would you say that's right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm really happy to be in the post-opinion phase. I guess it doesn't mean I never have opinions about anything, but for me, what that means is I'm not super attached to
Right, right.
one way of looking at things. And in fact, find myself trying to see things from other perspectives more and more, and that's introduced a greater degree of sanity and peace into my life, and maybe some more power as well, like your little peace and power sign off in your letter, and
Yep.
that kind of spoke to me. But I also wanted to say, Dylan, that you know, I mean, this is an internal time for me as well,
Hmm.
and that's that's my focus. So I'm not even focused on a lot of things, or let me rephrase that. I just don't care about a lot of things on the external, and every once in a while I get some flack for that because there are so many people who, are fighting the good fight still, and they want me to be fighting it with them. And if I'm not, then I'm like some kind of, deserter or something like that. So I've definitely had some kind of nasty, nasty feedback occasionally as I have withdrawn from the whole mess out there.
I think that a lot of people aren't really, as you put it a minute ago, aren't sane. Even the so many of the people I know that mean well, they're very involved, they're very close to all of the latest information that's coming out. I think they may be suffering what so many of other people are, is just that there's not a sense of sanity and peace. And so I wanted to ask you, you said you feel more sane. Like, what does that actually mean? You feel more sane. But really, I'm curious, like, what does it feel to like a cogent, intelligent, awake person? How would you come to describe like a feeling of insanity within yourself? Because I can relate to this, and I'm just curious what that experience could be like for you.
Yeah, I mean, you may know that I'm coming at some of this material from kind of a Gnostic perspective
Hmm.
and an alchemical perspective. So I am of the opinion that the human mind in its collective totality has been hijacked by a larger intelligence that is
Hmm.
called the Great Archon or the Demiurge, or there are lots of names for it historically. And even outside of the Gnostic mythos, you find people referring to this thing. I mean, sometimes it's called Satan, for example.
Right.
And so what we're talking about is a situation where the human operating system has been co-opted by another voice. So when we hear this voice in our heads, this inner dialogue that we engage in constantly as a rule, that is the voice of insanity. It's because it's our split
Hmm.
personality. You're listening to a different feed from our own internal feed.
Right.
And we're often torn between the two feeds. And that gives rise to the idea that you have an angel on one shoulder, a devil on the other, that sort of thing. But we are definitely split. So as one pulls away from that conversation, and there are different ways of doing that we could talk about, then you begin to get more and more silence. In fact, your own internal voice doesn't have a lot to say typically. When it speaks loudly, as it were. But I find that that voice is actually more of a silence than a voice. And I've embraced that a lot more in myself. I'm not where I would like to be in that process. I feel like I could go even more internal, more
Hmm.
silent on the internal, but I'm really focused on it. I just published a little video on my Substack the other day, and I think the title was "Speak Powerfully with Silence," and this is about boundaries and actually being silent, when there's conflict, and using silence as conflict resolution and that kind of thing. But you could also apply it to this internal struggle against the alien operating system that's been installed in people's minds, and they don't even know it's there. They don't
Yeah.
know they're not thinking with their right minds. They're not, and they don't even know it. And so one can have a degree of understanding and compassion for this situation because we've kind of all been there. And I think the real journey here, the real challenge is to admit this situation and then begin to take active steps to remove that operating system.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've looked at over the years in my own like personal journeys and many of the like awakening moments in my life. I've leaned on ancient wisdom, esoteric knowledge. I've been down so many, paths and side journeys and whatnot to explore a lot of that. Maybe it has something to do with my zodiac. I'm not really into astrology, but I know I'm a Taurus, and I feel that energy, that grounded, steady energy in a lot of areas in my life. And when I think about the stuff that you're talking about, this idea of insanity, which I personally know all too well, and we can get into some of our personal journeys in a little bit, but it very much is that. It's exactly the way that you're describing it. So there's this other voice in your head that just isn't doing you one shred of good whatsoever. It's
Mm.
always got something negative to say. It usually picks out one thing in your life and just puts, like repeats messaging about it that's just purely destructive on every level. And then it just gets to the point where there's this feedback loop of your emotional system and this triggering of the fight or flight response and all of this physiological stuff that goes on. And so you feel this rush of these like panic chemicals all the time. And it's happening in the mind and with the mind. And when I look at like the possibility of it being hijacked by another entity or something else, I feel like I don't feel empowered. I feel like then that takes a lot of the control and a lot of the power away from me because then there's something else that's influencing me. And so I've come to figure out what works best for me. And this is what I coach around a lot is helping people to realize like whatever it is, whatever and it's funny because I'm writing an article about this this week. But whatever it is, whatever's going on in the heavens or off planet or in the interdimensional realms or 5D realms or whatever, humans somehow have the capacity to overcome that through their own inner strength and through their own willpower and commitment to personal change. I've seen this over and over and over again and experienced it. And so, a lot of folks come to me as clients, like one of the things that they're struggling with, they're suffering from is that like repetitive negative thinking, repetitive negative thinking. And so I look at it in a couple of different ways, and I find that it's very helpful for folks to look at it in as the most grounded, most practical ways possible. There's an element of there's an element of learning how to pay attention to what's going on in your mind. There's an element of getting what's happening in your mind out of your mind by putting it onto paper and just removing it metaphysically from your inner space. There are psychological ways of looking at negative thinking and determining which types of negative thoughts they are and how to like use kind of the Socratic method to use logic over a period of time to think yourself out of negative thoughts and turn things around. I've also found it helpful just to teach people how to lie to themselves differently, you know, because most of what happens in these insane frames of mind, what you're talking about is it rarely, if ever, matches up with reality. I mean, I see so many people struggling with what's going on in their head. And when you really break it down and when you isolate the thoughts, like none of it really matches up equally with reality. In other words, like most of the stuff that they're telling, if not probably all of it for a lot of folks, is basically bullshit, right? It's just lies that you tell yourself, but lies with very serious negative consequences in your life. And so I've
Mm.
actually found it helpful to work in working with people to just retrain them, and say, hey, look, if you're willing to lie to yourself, then, let's do it in a more constructive way. You're the best from now on. Whenever you hear these thoughts creep up, just flip the script. It's actually fun for people to lighten up and take like a lighthearted approach to these heavy ideas. And when you talk about the heavens and archons and all this stuff, it's to me, it's always felt so heavy and so crippling, and I always felt so helpless to do anything about it when I look at it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I like the lying to yourself differently. I mean, that gets into the idea for me of reality creation. And it's not so much that there is for me, I don't believe in a pre-existing truth or a pre-existing reality. I believe that our observation coalesces our reality on a second by second, day by day basis.
Right.
So when you learn to lie differently, you're creating a different reality. It's always fiction telling. It's always storytelling. But I would like to say about the whole idea of archons and the great archon. There's a couple of things I would point out. First of all, yeah, I think in that discussion, as it's played out in the highly co-opted space of YouTube and other social media, and many other and writer in the books of writers and that kind of thing as well. I think that there has been an archontic agenda to make it very heavy and very unfaceable.
I
And to me,
totally agree with that. 100%.
but I believe that's part of the agenda of the very thing that's being addressed.
Yep.
And the reason I think that thing is there is when you begin to learn to see with the inner senses and to feel the energy, you can actually encounter it. And you can encounter it in dreams. So it's not, for me, it's not a philosophy. It's not an idea out there. It is an experience of direct gnosis of something going on. And also a direct gnosis of the way that energy flows in and out of me and through the world in many ways and what one can do about it. And what I've really focused on for for a long time now is different mindsets, yes, but also different very practical techniques for reclaiming your energy, your energetic
Hmm.
sovereignty, your space, for setting those boundaries, for being in your silence, for getting the voice, out of your head, whatever it is, whatever this thing is, what I perceive it as a dream being, a being from the dream world. And there are lots of these things out there, and I've encountered them in dreams, and I've had very, very wild experiences, and I've also had very Castaneda-like experiences where
I was just thinking
beings,
Castaneda.
those beings have bled over into my waking reality and have actually been witnessed by other people with me.
Mm.
So I've had some extremely wild stuff that kind of corroborates this intuitive inner sense of this inner sight, the seeing that I've been able to develop to some degree as I've worked on my personal power.
It's really interesting that you said Castaneda because right before you said it, I was going to ask you about Castaneda. I was thinking as soon as you started talking about dreams in the terms that you were. But is there any of those experiences that you can share? Some of the stuff that you said bled over into reality that was just amazing.
Yeah, sure. When when I was really sick back, a couple decades ago now, and I was looking for a cure to my or some way of addressing my autoimmune illness,
Hmm.
into DNA, ideas about DNA activation and sound healing, the way that sound could be used to do something epigenetically or epigenetically to turn genes on, turn them off, whatever, to help the body maybe re rescript or reprogram the way it was responding to the environment because I was basically allergic to everything and I was dying. So my partner Lee and I
Mm.
uh, we journeyed to Brazil based on a number of wild events in their own right, serendipities and pieces of guidance. And we got there, and then we were kind of led by our guides or our guidance through Brazil, and we encountered all kinds of crazy things like weather spirits, like things
Hmm.
that basically like weather allies straight out of something like Castaneda.
Right, right, right.
And that just, I mean, we found ourselves, we thought we were being hindered or kept from going where we were going, but in retrospect, we were actually being steered.
Steered. Yeah.
But I mean, we had moments when we were literally, one minute we were having a nice meal in a churrascaria, the next we're out on the street in 3.5 feet of water up to our chests, and just crazy things that were happening. And I could feel these odd things stirring, and I would have premonitions about them. And I would be like, Lee, we need to get the hell out of here. Something is about to go down. And of course, I was coming at it from I guess, a more fearful, almost victim perspective. I was sick. I was trying to figure out how to get well, which I eventually did. The most dramatic event that happened during that process was when we were sort of told through the inner voice to go to this certain beach in this town where we were staying in Brazil, and we went and we literally had an experience of seeing these lights on top of the water on the ocean, and they came into us.
Hmm.
And it was very, very bizarre. And then there was a kind of quietness that happened after that. And we went back home and went to bed. And in the night, we began dreaming of these sound codes that we were supposed to use to heal me.
Hmm.
And we were literally being given the correct vowels in the correct sequence at the correct pitch to be sung.
In the
And
outcome.
And when we did that, yeah, I started getting well within weeks.
Fascinating.
Health started changing, and Lee's health started changing. She had asthma and scoliosis and some other things, and she noticed like major changes across the board. For
That's
me, it was an absolute reboot. It was incredible. So
that's fascinating. Yeah.
that was potentiation. That's the first activation in what became the regenetics method.
Let me ask you something because this is fascinating to me. Because I was thinking prior to recording this with you, what are some good things to talk about? I wanted to have an open conversation with you because I know there's a lot of directions you can go with insight in every way you look. But I was thinking I was really curious to get your insight on what it takes for people to clear the blocks to mystical experience. How can people reconnect? What's standing in the way for ordinary folks to find a connection to that inspiration, that knowing that there's something bigger and greater than all of this facade and phony baloney politics and war and hate and evil and all this stuff. And so when you're talking about receiving these codes, like the first thing that comes to mind is perhaps his body was more prepared to receive mystical spiritual information on account of the fact that it had been, going through hell. I imagine that if you were allergic to a lot of foods, your diet was probably pretty pared down. Your detox probably from a whole lot of stuff. And so the last podcast I did, just this most recent one, we were talking about what it takes to prepare for ceremony. And one of those aspects of it is paring down your diet, getting as much toxic stuff out of your body because it seems to awaken the vessel to be more capable of receiving spiritual information and wisdom and insight and whatnot. Do you think that any of the condition of your body and whatnot at that time had an impact on your ability to actually receive the codes and then take them out of dreams and apply them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something Lee and I have thought about and talked about. I've written about it, and occasionally. Let me back up and punt. First of all, yeah, I think what it takes to to have a mystical experience historically, if you look cross-culturally, it appears to be some kind of dark night of the soul.
Hmm.
Just go to William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience.
Right,
I mean,
right.
ridiculous. And then, looking into all of Jung's stuff and what led him to focus on the importance of the shadow and encountering the other in ourselves in order to wake up and have, religious or mystical experiences. So absolutely. That I mean, I was going to be snarky and then you said it. Um, so my experience was a little bit different though in terms of the diet. I was just sick. I was weakened from not being able to eat, and
Right.
I could not detoxify. That was my problem, and I was getting thin
Hmm.
and emaciated and that sort of thing. So what because I couldn't eat, and so what happened when I'm not exactly sure what triggered that experience, except maybe a willingness to just go and follow the guidance. It was
Hmm.
crazy. We didn't have any plans when we went to Brazil. We just went. I said goodbye to my family. I thought maybe that was really goodbye. I
Hmm.
was not doing well at all. And so I think maybe there's that, I have a song that I'm going to be releasing at some point, and the lyrics are, if you're going to be a fool, you better do it right. So I was just being the fool. I was being the fool in the tarot, but I was doing it right somehow. I know that may sound self-aggrandizing, but it felt like I was just being the fool,
Hmm.
So what happened when we did these codes, we did potentiation for ourselves, is that I began purging.
Yep.
And when I say purging, I don't mean like a little bit of detox. Oh, I think that was detox. Do you think that was detox, Lee? Yeah, maybe that was detox. No, I mean the dam broke.
Hmm.
And for months, it just started coming out. I called it the swamp thing.
Wow.
Was just gobbledygook from my fascia, my cells. God knows where this stuff had been stored, or even what it was, because it didn't look like it should ever be in a human being. You're talking about fungal, bacterial, weirdness, heavy metals, everything in the world.
Yep. Yep.
Literally, sometimes it would move in the toilet bowl. And I hate to be so graphic, but just I want people to know that this was a living thing that had gotten inside me. And so when I talk about the mind being hijacked, I'm actually just sanitizing it. Your body has also been hijacked. And there's a lot of
Hmm.
different that's happened. So
That's
they
fascinating.
have to expel this demon, and I put that in quotes because I don't want to give it religious context. But whatever this thing is, you gotta get it out of you. And you cannot get it out of you, in my estimation, or I don't know how to do it without sealing something called the fragmentary body. The fragmentary body is basically a point that is associated with the region of what some people think of as the second chakra, the second frequency band in the body, uh, coming up from the sacral area. And that is like an open wound in everyone. It's where we bleed out our life force. And it's where we're actually possessed by etheric and physical parasites of various kinds.
And you said the second chakra?
Yep. It comes in through there, and then you're basically bleeding out all this energy, and you're just an open door to whatever wants to come in and inhabit you. And I believe that's where the archontic mind, the archons, that kind of these mental parasites that people like John Lamb Lash write about, they're coming in through the second chakra, which Lee and I call the fragmentary body. And if you want to read a lot more about it, I have two books on the subject. One is Conscious Healing, and the
Hmm.
other one, Potentiate Your DNA. And that book is is out in Spanish. It will be out in French pretty soon, and it's also going to be an audiobook as soon as possibly next week.
Hmm, awesome. Yeah, it's interesting because I practiced yoga for many years off and on. I practice these days in addition to all the things that I do to work on my body. I do qigong pretty much every day. Qigong isn't, they don't rely on the same system of chakras that,
No.
the Indian um, paths do.
I did Qigong a lot when I was really sick. It was the thing that got me back on my feet. It didn't cure
Right.
me, but it saved my life. Yeah, I mean, literally, it allowed me to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. There's been probably 3 or 4 situations in my life where it's healed me in ways that nobody else could. And a couple times where it's saved me from probably saved my life for sure.
Hmm.
But it's not a system that leans on the idea of chakras at all. So I'm not personally like, like my knowledge and interest in chakras is pretty limited. So when I
When
look at
I
the
say
second,
chakra, though, Dylan, I don't really mean it is that chakra. I mean, this is where this fissure is in the bioanatomy, the bioenergetic anatomy. Where you can, I just say chakra because a lot of people understand that and they can sort of
right.
visualize what I'm talking about. But it's the same place where the inner alchemists talk about your cauldron being.
Yeah. And this is what I wanted to say about that was that
Dantian area.
Dantian, when I looked this up, when I looked this up just real quick, just a basic search on the sacral chakra, it says the sacral chakra is associated with the following psychological and behavioral functions. And these are all the things that I deal with my clients and have been working on myself the last few years. And it has been a dense few years for me, some of the densest, most difficult, challenging years of my adult life for sure. But it rattles off right here at the top. It says the sacral chakra is associated with the following psychological and behavioral functions: emotions and feelings, relationships, relating, expression of sexuality, sensual pleasure, feeling the outer and inner worlds, creativity, and fantasies. I mean, that so much of those aspects of what I see in people and have felt in myself have been corrupted. So
Hmm.
maybe that overlaps well with what you're talking about. And again, when you commented that you look at things from the mystical top-down perspective. I wasn't splitting hairs with you at all, just saying that like people look at things, it's advantageous for different people to look at situations to from perspectives that aid them. And
Absolutely.
it's interesting. I just find so much overlap in what you're saying. But yeah, like the area of emotions and feelings, that's the mammalian mind, right? It feels like it's been completely hijacked. I mean, I've said this before on podcasts and whatnot. Just look at how people react to everything. And when you talk about the top-down archonic kind of like implant of the heaviness in our culture, well, pragmatically and operationally, what that looks like is creating these new forums where, people communicate with emojis. They communicate with, instead of expressing, complex ideas and whatever's going on in mind, they can suss all that down to like a happy face or a sad face emoji, which is, it kind of almost reminds me of some of the stuff that goes on in George Orwell's 1984, right?
Oh,
Um,
that's funny. Yeah, yeah.
just the dumbing down of our capacity to express thought, right? And so the emotional centers have definitely been hijacked, and that's where people really get derailed. And that's, like I said, again, one of the main things I really assist people with is understanding that their emotions are the environment that we're in uh, drives us to allow the emotional body to reign supreme, not the logical mind, the emotional mind. And so in that, people confuse reality with their feelings. And for people who are conscious and are striving to do better and be better in their lives, I find it really helpful to help people understand how consciousness feels. And this I lean heavily on the work of David Hawkins with, but consciousness feels like a feeling. So a lower state of consciousness, take grief or shame or apathy or something like that, there's a feeling associated with it. And so when you feel these feelings, when you feel the depression or the anger and the resentment or the overwhelm or the frustration or the just like unquenchable desire, that hungry ghost that's been let loose in our culture. When you feel all of these are indicative of existing in lower fields of consciousness. And these consciousnesses carry with them their own level of thinking, their own ideas and thoughts. And so helping people to understand that they can control their state of consciousness by disconnecting the mind and the body, the connection that happens between the mind and the body, that loop. In other words, being able to separate the events that shape the feelings from the feelings that you actually have. So just to be able to feel feelings, and that's also listed in the characteristics of the second chakra, their struggle with feeling the outer and inner worlds. But
Mm.
I've too also like the over sexualization of everything, especially the over sexualization of the male mind. I find that incredibly inhibitive for men today. So a lot of these things on this list definitely overlap with what you're saying, I feel.
Yeah, it's interesting. The fragmentary body, when Lee and I were researching it and testing on it, doing a lot of kinesiology, I was seeing a bunch of different clients who were coming to me for allergy elimination techniques. So I was doing muscle testing or kinesiology on a lot of different people. We've discovered that the fragmentary body in all people is basically linked to the sexual organs and the
Hmm.
mouth and tongue.
Hmm.
So you're talking about creation and procreation here.
Interesting.
So the way we speak our realities into existence, or the way that we sexualize our progeny into existence, whatever you want,
Huh.
however you want to describe that, it's all these are acts of creation. So the fragmentary body is a kind of corrupted creator. It's been used against us and turned inward, and it allows an intrusive presence to come into us, whether that's some, mystical being or something from the dream world, or if it's just our plain old psychopathic leadership who own the media and they're controlling minds that way. So, however you want to look at it, you can still get there and understand that something intrusive is occurring in our society and it's affecting minds and bodies,
Hmm.
and I would certainly argue spirits. So you have to
Hmm.
look at, I think you have to look at the full range of, the sexual aspect ranging all the way to the creative aspect that we access primarily through language. And so you end up at the mouth and the tongue.
That's interesting because in Chinese medicine, the tongue and the sexual organs are linked. So like
Right.
in some practices that I've done, like male sexual energetic practices and that sort of thing, like the exercises like begin with the tongue and the mouth. No, there's some more overlap there.
It's absolutely true. I know some of the sexual alchemy that you're talking about, and it's very consistent.
It's interesting. You had mentioned kinesiology. Are you familiar with David Hawkins' work?
Yeah, I write about him in Conscious Healing.
Okay, okay,
Power versus Force was really, really
okay, okay.
illuminating. You know, what I kept wanting to bring to the table in talking to people about that book years ago, and he does this to some degree, but I feel that there's a bit of a demonization of the lower energies.
I agree.
And this is where I kept wanting to bring in somebody like Jung and say, but it's all part of us. We can say those are lower, but even using that language is judgmental, really. The challenge is to just embrace all of it and not judge it. Sort of to go into the post-opinion phase about all of that. And I think that really helps even things out, where we can just be in this, we can navigate this sea of our emotions much more adeptly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I said I agree with that comment about, Hawkins looking at the sexual energies as being lower energies, and that's true in large part. But there's definitely some of his work that I've read that I've gotten a lot of assistance from, where he looks at like the field of consciousness we're operating when we're like engaging in sexual activity or thoughts or whatever. It changes everything, right? And so for most people, their sexuality comes from the consciousness of desire. And so in desire, there's this wanting of something that you don't have. So, and that all of that is predicated on the idea that you don't have it. And by knowing that you don't have it, it separates you from it, right? And so the need arises, and that creates frustration and stress and strain in relationships, transactionality in relationships, and also changes one's like view of sexuality in general. Is sex a sin? Is it dirty? And whatnot. So when you look at some of his other writings on it, it's interesting because when you're operating from a higher level of consciousness, it is the pure energy. I mean, this is just like again in qigong, this is the jing, right? The creative sexual energy. He
Right.
he
Right.
acknowledges and recognizes its power and importance as such. In fact, there's one passage in one of his books that I found really interesting because it talks about like healing relationships and sexual frustration and male impotence and all these kind of things, and looks at them purely from a level of consciousness. And the remedy to all of this is to approach sex and sexuality with the highest level of consciousness you can. And so in that space, and he even has an exercise on this. If you're trying to figure out how to do this, you don't concentrate on the genitalia, you don't concentrate on the bodies, like you concentrate solely on dantian, lower dantian.
Mm,
And when you
mm.
bring your mind and your attention there during the sexual act, right, like that to him opens up the higher access capabilities of sexual energy. So it's not in that sense a lower energy.
Well, yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I think I know what you're talking about. And it relates to this fragmentary body concept at the level of the Dantian that I've been talking about. Because when you do certain things to the to that fragmentary body area, you collapse it, you make it smaller. And so you could say that what you're basically doing at that point in time is creating more coherence
Right.
up your spinal column where the energy can flow and out through the meridian system for as well. Because what we have as things stand for most people is this we have these lower energy areas in the body, and then the energy tries to move up the spine. You have the Ida, the Pingala, the Shushumna, these channels in Eastern in certain like Hindu ways of understanding energy, and the energy is trying to kind of Kundalini snake its way up, right? And the problem is that there's this huge gulf at the level of the fragmentary body. So in order to get the energy to leap across that like Evil Knievel or something on his bicycle on his motorbike, across one of these snake canyons or something like that, you have to create so much force in those lower areas that it shoots over that gap and then it will blow up into basically into your frontal lobes. And this is a Kundalini crisis.
Hmm.
So you just sort of fry your brain, you fry your nervous system with all of this energy. And this is a very real thing that has happened to lots and lots of people. There's an Australian author named Denis Heistand who used to be flown all over the world to treat people who were having this problem. Very, very fascinating. So when you do things like you were describing to shrink this area to make it more coherent, there's less of a disruption for the energy to flow much more naturally, and you can engage in more of a sexual alchemy where the energy can be integrated at a reasonable pace into your system. So what Lee and I discovered with potentiation and that particular activation was that it's possible to use these vowel sounds to basically tell your energy body to close the
Hmm.
fragmentary body. It closes the fragmentary body. It's like it's no longer there.
Hmm.
It literally edits out the fragmentary body.
Let me ask you something. Okay. I don't recall if you're a plant medicine guy. I don't think that's the case. Is that right?
Well, I mean, have I done plant medicines? Do I know a good bit about them? Yes and yes, but it's not what I lead with. It's not my main thing.
Okay. Okay. In the tradition that I'm part of, when we drink yahe, one of the most important things to do, in other words, like the way to conduct yourself in a ceremony is with absolute stillness. Okay, so there's a couple of pieces to it. Like it's absolute stillness. We slow the breath down, but we also close the perineum, right? We close that lower chakra, right? And so it acts as like a lock, almost like you put the cap on your energy body. When you really do this enough times, and when you meditate through this and you think about it, I know you can do this in non-altered states of consciousness as well. I just find the overlap with this medicine fascinating. But when you do this, you can absolutely feel. You can feel the leakage when you don't do it, right? And you could feel the containment, like that strength within you when you do it. And so
Yeah.
it also reminds me of something very interesting. Like when I went through my first whole dark night of the soul, and that wasn't my first, that wasn't my last one. But I've had at least a couple, two or three. But my first big one when I was younger, this is 20 years ago or so now. Really bad one. But I was reading all of these things, these books about Kundalini and all these Qigong and all this stuff, and I'd never heard of any of this stuff before. And it was just like the synchronicity kept dropping all this information in my lap. I didn't know any of this stuff was possible or real at all. And so when I would read something about Kundalini and the possibilities with that energy, or Qigong and how to direct the Qi. And at the time I was training really hard in Kung Fu. So I was really interested in it. I was always so like mystified. Like it just blew my mind that there was the possibility that we had access to some like mystical force within us, right? And we could use that to our own advantage for healing or what have you. And one of the books I came across was another Qigong master. His name's Mantak Chia. I'm sure you've heard of him. It's a good chance you have, anyways. But his book, the book that I found, was called Awaken Healing Energy with the Tao. And pretty short, little simple book, Saul, but it was basically just a meditation to do what he calls open the microcosmic orbit, which sounds an awful lot like what you're talking about. It uses the governing and grand meridian channels of the body to draw energy up the spine into the brain, circulate it in the brain, and then bring it down in the front of the body, coating all the organs and whatnot, and then of course like reconnecting at the perineum.
Yeah,
But
I do the microcosmic orbit as on a daily basis in this
yeah,
for the breathing stuff that I do. I mean, I mean, I studied Qigong for years, and
yeah,
um, so I mean, it's very real. I mean,
very real.
I love that you know about all of this because for some people they don't have the experience and the language to even talk about this.
Yeah, and so like first off with the microcosmic orbit, I mean that's my go-to post-workout sitting in the sauna meditation. I'll sit in the sauna for 15 minutes and roast and just circulate that energy, just follow that simple thing. And the reason why it's so valuable to me, or so important to me, is that that was my first mystical experience. So when I was going through this dark night of the soul and I was trying everything, man, I was like just praying, holding on for dear, for life, really. I mean, really, truly, I was searching in every direction for help and assistance. And just, the universe kept telling me over and over again that ain't nobody here to help you, man. This is one you got to figure out on your own. Now, I can help you figure it out, but you're going to have to figure it out. And so like this book, the microcosmic orbit book, came into my purview here, and I was like, all right, we'll try this out. And I started doing that, and there was a promise in this book. It was basically like, yeah, if you do this, this is what you will experience, and if you do it, you need to do it every day. Follow the program, do it every single day, and this is what you'll experience. These are the positive things you'll experience. Here's the potential negative things you could experience, and a lot of that was, caution, the warning about frying your brain, to put it in simplistic terms. Um, but so I sat down and I started doing this meditation every day. I did it every night after work or whenever I could. And it was, about 20 minutes long, but I did it. And it was 28 something days into it. And I was sitting in my living room floor on my little pillow doing this meditation on like a Friday night or something, something bizarre like that. And all of a sudden, in an instant, every like my ears started ringing really, really loudly. And I was like, oh boy, this is what's going on. And I had read the book, and that was, that was a sign, that was a symptom that things were opening up, right? And this is all new mystical stuff to me. So I'm like, okay, something's happening. And so I just stayed very, very still. I stayed very much in following the breath and following the meditation. And then after a short while, like that broke, and I felt that whole complete channel, that whole microcosmic orbit, that whole pathway throughout the inside of my body, just like absolutely as it was described in the book, open up. And I felt, the chi, the energy moving, everything. And it really truly changed the direction of my life. It gave me something to pursue. But yeah, folks are wondering, like, is this stuff real? Yeah, it really is real. And so when you talk about preparing yourself for a mystical experience, one of the things that I think is fundamental to that is a commitment to some kind of practice, right? So like an earnest commitment to a daily practice. And so like you say, you do the microcosmic orbit every day. I do certain things every day, and I think that's just absolutely fundamental. It's finding something that works for you and that keeps you connected to that sense of something greater than all the Biden nonsense and Trump and wars and all this crap going on.
Uh,
There's
You
something
know,
bigger and better out there.
for me, I would say there's a shamanic principle that I think is extremely valuable, and it's called not doing.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this notion?
Yeah, but the first thing that comes to mind is Carlos Castaneda's work, Stop the World.
Right. It's related to that, and in
Yeah.
fact, that phrasing does come out of Castaneda's work, but you can
Yeah.
apply it in different ways, and I've talked about it, and I've used different language to describe it, and I understand it differently in different contexts. But in
Hmm.
essence, one of the things that happens with this hive mind or mind installation that I've been talking about is that we get sucked more and more and more into certain ways of doing things.
Right.
Like I just saw a funny video on YouTube the other day by a pretty well-known author, and she was asking, and with a fairly decent sized channel, and she was saying, why are all the books the same? They look the same. It's the same plot lines. It's vampires. All of this shit. And she's like, what's going on? And she had her own ideas, but I listened to that and I thought she had a lot of really good points. But for me, she kind of missed the big point, which was it's supposed to be. We're being steered. The herd is being driven in a certain way. All the sheeple are being, their minds are being driven in a certain direction. So it's very important to not get in a routine, in my opinion, you say a
Hmm.
daily practice that is like a rut. It's very important to have different things that you do that you can vary on different days, depending on any number of factors, including just a pure whim. But they should all be helpful and interesting things. And one of the things that you can do is simply do nothing.
Hmm.
Or you can do something bizarre. You can do something that makes absolutely no sense. I'm not saying to hurt yourself or anybody else, but this is a disruption of these controlling eddies of power that are driving people in a certain direction. And I think so. I like the idea of having a toolkit of practices that you can engage in and do things in a very different way from day to day, but they all are kind of consistent in some interesting way with each other. Like when I work out, for example, I have a I have a stripper pole in my house that I use for conditioning and that I spin around on and do stretching and I hang from it and do those types of things. I do primal movement. I do rebounding. I do Pilates. I do all kinds of different things. I also do a lot of plyometric exercises where I'm jumping and bouncing and jumping jacks and all of that kind of thing. And sometimes I'll just put on music and get on the rebounder and get some little weights and just dance.
Yep.
When I
Yep.
just go crazy, just go absolutely crazy. And for me, that's really, I know all of that sounds kind of crazy, but it's very conducive to feeling more sane because you
Oh,
just
yes.
allowing yourself to be kind of a human animal in a way and not get hung up on, oh God, am I doing my practice right today? I think a lot of Eastern traditions, they drive me crazy because there's such a kind of
Yep.
focus on the practice.
Yep.
And I think the practice can be so much larger than that, can be part of like the practice should have a little p, and then the bigger thing that's a part of should have the capital P.
That's really interesting, man. That's such an interesting way to put it. I was thinking about this just over the week. Just kind of looking at all the things that I do for my body, right? There's so much that I do. Yeah, I'm 48, right? Dancing though, man, dancing is the glue. I call it the glue. My wife and I, we met in a dance club 30 years
Oh, I
ago, and
love it. I love it.
30 years ago, and it's like that's still what we do, man. With any chance we can get a break from the kids, we'll go to a good dance show, man, and just throw down and get all
Oh,
sweaty and
that's
stuff.
great. That's
And to
great.
me, it's there to us, really, it's absolute therapy. I mean, the stuff that I do with my body is like, I mean, it's bonkers. Like Sunday, I was doing kung fu, right? So I'm doing forms and jumping and kicking and throwing out knees and stuff like that. I do jujitsu at least twice a week. That's extremely hard on a 48-year-old body.
Sure, sure.
Lift weights, 3 times a week, do qigong, some variation of qigong, whatever strikes me, pretty much every day. Lots of walking, running, and all that kind of stuff. And the dancing is what I do whenever I'm just like not feeling my movement patterns right on par. We go dancing, and so that's always been like the glue. It's the best thing that you could do for your body. Even one of my qigong teachers back in the day, man, someone that walked me through a very intense, very transformational qigong practice over the course of a couple of years. I talked to him, 8 or 10 years after that, and I was like, well, what direction are you teaching in these days? And he's like, man, I boiled all the qigong down basically to what helps people the most. And I was like, well, what's that? And he's like, shaking, just shaking their body, literally.
I love it. Yeah, I've
Just,
heard the same thing from people.
just like literally just shaking.
Yep.
One of my other teachers told me that he used to go out and one of his masters would be like, all right, well, I want you to get up at sunrise and come stand out here, feet shoulder width apart and just do hip rotations for like 2 hours in all directions.
Is it Peter Levine who does somatic therapy? I'm trying to remember the name.
Oh, I don't know. But somatic therapy is an interesting
He
one.
wrote something like The Way of the Tiger or something like that was his first book. I've written about his work and I've actually experienced it. he writes about how animals release trauma by shaking.
He's not the guy that lives in the mountains up here in North Carolina, is he?
I don't know. I don't know where he lives.
No, I don't think so. I looked him up on there was a guy like that that taught all kind of martial arts and esoteric stuff like that up in the
Yeah,
mountains I
he's
heard
not a
about.
martial artist. He's more like a
Right.
PhD professor. I'm
Hmm.
looking at let's see, Peter Levine. Yeah, Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma. So he's got, a lot of information about how to heal trauma, but he tells the story of, how animals de-traumatize after, let's say, an animal is set upon by a predator, but it escapes.
Yep.
And then when it is in the clear and everything is
Shakes.
cool, it just shakes it all
Shakes.
out,
And then it's done
we don't do that. So we end up in this fight or flight or freeze situation
chronically. Yep.
permanently. And it freezes up our fascia and it causes so many problems. It's just, I don't even know where to start. But one way to begin undoing that traumatic patterning or imprinting is to just shake.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've talked about that before on the podcast at least a couple of times, but yeah, I remember looking at gazelles. And if you watch a gazelle, like there's all these videos, National Geographic videos and stuff, of gazelle almost getting caught by the bush lion, almost, right? And you can tell he's in the greatest fight of his life, panicking, and then he walks off. As soon as he realizes it's safe, it's like your cat or your dog. They just shake, like just like
Yeah.
viscerally, like just absolutely just go crazy for just a little bit, and then you could tell like they're complete. It's a complete reset for their nervous system. And I think too, man, I think like that's such an important thing for people to think about is like the health of their nervous system and through all of this, everything that's going on. I mean, the stimulus that puts us in fight or flight is so great. The external stimuli is so great. But then if you add that to the internal struggles that people are going through, I mean, just that mind body connection of that negative feedback loop. I mean, we're talking like people are always, and I'm speaking firsthand here. Like for years, I spent in this state of anxiety and really trying to understand why. And honestly, it took me like getting alcohol out of my life and a whole bunch of other stuff out of my life for a couple of years, and really just sitting with how I felt about myself and just how I felt in my body for a long time, and finally coming to the understanding that I do have control over my nervous system. And so for a lot of like even like with my clients, we'll talk about that first. What is there any supplementation that you may need for your nervous system? Are there any things that you're doing that chronically agitate your nervous system, like coffee, like whatever else, right? So many people do so many things to just get through the day. Nicotine's a big one, has a really really profound impact on the puts a strain on the nervous system. So that's critical as well. When you talk about being at a point of not having an opinion, that's kind of a crass way to put it. What I really mean to say is that you're just approaching what all is happening from the level of consciousness of at least acceptance. I just accept what's happening. This is how the world turns when I get my chance to ride it, right? And
Hmm.
and there's no attachment to an outcome, whereas in the past there's been a tremendous outcome, tremendous attachment to overcoming the new world order and stopping the banks and all of that stuff. And when you finally get to the point where you accept what's going on, then you finally actually have power to make any kind of stand at all, and even if that's a stand for someone else and to assist someone else. But again, like the stress on the nervous system, I think understanding that and being calm, and that's why I sign off all my emails and such with the signature that says peace and power.
I like
I
that.
just don't think there's anything more valuable to people than to not be plagued by that insanity that you were talking about and to feel powerful. And so, like an example of what it means to feel powerful, some of the men I'm working with now are, in marriages and relationships, and marriages aren't easy, folks. Many times they can be worth, but they're not easy. And so, it's easy for a man or for a person in a relationship in general to lose sight of their power, to lose connection with their power, to feel powerless with their partner. And it's not how it's supposed to be. And so, people often find that, like, they often seem to me to think that the way to power is by force, like you said, is by overcoming the other power that's coming against you, by being a greater counterforce to whatever's coming your way. And really, like so much of the progress that I see in the men I work with in relationships, like so much of the headway, the moving forward comes from them learning how to just be still and just like take in what's happening and not react and not become reactive and being calm and very, very much emotionally independent from any scenario, whether it's relationship or money or anything else that's going on in the world, but just to have this deep rooted stability and emotional sobriety, and that's the peace and power. And I think that's just like that's the most valuable thing anybody could master at this point, because when you have that, when you wake up in the morning and you start your day with that peace and power instead of that anxiety and worry, like you can do anything. You have the energy to do anything. Your energy isn't being consumed by all of the negativity and all of the feedback loops of worry and overwhelm and frustration and stuff. So again, interesting overlap, my friend.
Truly interesting. I mean, I'm really glad we're on such similar pages. I coined the phrase, I think I coined it anyway, feedback, feedback loosh.
Loosh.
Feedback loop, where we're being, the feedback loop that we're in, where we're being loop being our kind of vital force that's being used by something else or someone else.
Right.
And it seems like all of our media, even our quote unquote alternative media, is designed to just feed that loop and keep us in it. Like if you go to my website at saulluckman.substack.com, you can look up an article and video series that I wrote on the trouble with truthing and doing a truther detox
Yeah. Yeah.
and literally just stopping trying to figure out what is going on. First of all, you're never really going to figure it out, and you're just going to go in circles because it's the way this quote unquote reality is designed. And second of all, you're going to make yourself crazy and maybe sick in the process, and you're going to ruin your relationships and other things besides. So, you know, understand that this is kind of a crazy world that we're in that you're not really going to get to the bottom of, and no one else has either. It doesn't really matter if they pretend to have done so. And then you can begin ignoring your news feed and go about your day focusing on your internal creative process, being in your silence, being in your power, this sort of thing. And boy, your life will change. It won't take it more than a week
No,
or two, and you'll start to see
totally.
huge changes in your life.
Totally. That's interesting. A couple of years ago, I wrote an article. It's called "The Truth Seeker's Dilemma," talking exactly about that. Like
Oh, that's
just
interesting.
yeah, it's just the kind of that same idea. It's like, man, like where's the search leading you? And a lot of the clientele that I work with are, truthers. They care deeply, Saul, about the world and the direction it's going. Like they care so much. But when you really dig down, you find that there's this it's almost like the real motivation for a lot of it is kind of like a sense of shadow recruitment, right? They're really afraid. Like they haven't overcome that fear, that gripping fear of what could happen when the boots come knocking at the front door or whatever it is, whatever
Right.
manifestation is going on in their mind. And so it's like an
That's yes.
it's so many of the truthers are operating from that standpoint, and they do a really really good job of making it look altruistic and purposeful. But what I really find is that old idea that the subconscious mind just wants to fit in. I don't know if you're familiar with Jason Christoph, but he had he talks about that a lot, the roots of self-sabotage being the subconscious's mind just desperately seeking to to fit in for its own survival, right? And so when you see everybody drinking and drugging and tattooing and like all this other stuff, like anything that's bad for you, if it's popularized, like you'll do it regardless if it's bad for you, because you have this innate need, until you logically and spiritually overcome it. You have this innate need to do what the herd is doing.
Yeah, Christoph gets into all of the kind of repetitive
Yeah.
programming,
Yep.
TV, internet, and all that. Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that,
In this article that I read, I'm just like skimming through it. I quoted a song from Roger Waters. The quote is the lyrics are, "Hey bartender over here, two more shots and two more beers. Sir, turn up the TV sound. The war has started on the ground." I just love those laser guided bombs. They're really
Wow.
great for righting wrongs. You hit the target and win the game from bars 3,000 miles away, 3,000 miles away, and it's this idea that like it actually was one of the questions I had for you on my notes today was like, what should we care about? Like what is worth caring about in this time?
Wow, that's interesting. I was thinking about that a moment ago, and I was also thinking about lyrics to a song that I haven't even released. That's just kind of like that. It's it's this idea of kind of getting your marching orders from something outside yourself. The song is called Marching Orders, and
Hmm.
it's back to the idea that there's some kind of unified force or consciousness or something that is, after your mind and after your energy, and it's using you as a pawn in a much larger game. So what that means to me is that you can't fight that totality. You can only take back your own power. And when you do that, you actually begin feeding on the thing that's been feeding on you.
Hmm.
You
Turning the
become, you
tables on the
become the you
parasite.
become the apex predator in your world, and you can actually take all of that energy and make it your own and purify it. You can do this alchemically. And, if you want to call that chi or prana or kundalini or, the alchemical egg or whatever you would like to call it. And it can truly, truly empower you. But here was what I was going to say, Dylan, to this idea of, what's really important here. And we've been talking about post opinion and all that kind of thing. For me, what's really important is to do what works
Mm.
and to absolutely release as many preconceptions and dogmatic opinions and things that I've accepted without really verifying them myself,
Hmm.
you know, as possible, as is reasonable, if I may use that term, and then to do things to empower myself and to look at my results
Hmm.
and to also observe the changes in my surroundings and in my world and let that be my guide. And if something isn't working, either I've not done it right, I've not done it long enough, or it's not working.
It's not for you.
Yeah. So you have to go through, checks and balances with this process of doing what is right for you that works for you. And what works for you may not work for someone else, and vice versa. And you know
Hmm.
what? That's okay. In fact, that's great. It means we're not totally all robotized yet. We're not part of the hive mind entirely. We still have some individuality, thank goodness. So let's celebrate our diversity, our uniqueness, our differences. Yes, there will be things that kind of apply generally, kind of general concepts about human energy and that sort of thing. But what's actually going to heal your trauma? I have no idea, really. I have some ideas of things you might try, and then use your evaluation of whether it works to let that be your guide.
Mm. Yeah, I had a similar conversation with a client just recently, and it was everybody's looking for the how. How do I overcome this? How do I feel better? How do I do better? And there's so much messaging about, self-discipline and morning routines and changing your habits and getting atomic habits and all this, kind of stuff. And, like I told him, I was like, man, like everything that there's so much stuff out there. There's a million books on it. There's like everything, like all of it works some of the time for some people. Okay. Yeah. All of it works some of the time for some people. You have to figure out what works for you.
Yeah, I
You
like that.
absolutely have to figure out what works for you. And so in answering the question of the how to's of the process, it's really like I say, in my exploration and my like sort of I feel is a grounded way of looking at it, like there's so many directions you can go. But all of the to me it all boils down to two things: awareness and action. Are you aware of what needs to change and how to change it? And then are you capable and willing and committed to taking action to doing something about it? So whatever tradition it is, I find that there's a process of developing awareness and then actually mustering the intention to do the thing that works for you. And
Or
so
to
like when
not
I
do the thing, because there might be
or
the
to
act
not do, yeah, and
might
that's a
very well
really good
be
point.
inaction. And because when you talk about men, for example, losing their power in certain relationships, very often they are in a repetitive behavioral cycle where they
Yep.
keep giving that power away instead of standing in their power
Yep.
and doing a big fat nothing.
Yep. Yep. 100%. And so, that's something that doesn't get talked about as often as it should as well. And that is people are looking for things to add. They're looking for techniques, supplements, things to add to make things work out. And it's often what you subtract that makes the difference.
I'm
And it's
so
what,
glad you said that because I write about this in Potentiate Your DNA and in Conscious Healing. that when you have more energy that's available to
Right.
you and you're able to interact with your environment differently and you have actually more chi, you will extract more nutrients from whatever food you're eating. You will also expel more toxins from whatever you happen to be taking in. It's really ultimately all about the energy. With
Right.
the, enough energy, you can live kind of however you want to, except at that point in time, maybe you won't want to because you'll be a different person entirely. You'll like you wanted to live a certain way and then you have all this energy and then that seems kind of stupid and you go do something else. But we have clients, this has happened for decades now who will come to us and they're taking like a cabinet full of supplements.
Yep.
And we're sort of like, what the hell are you doing? And our advice, without being doctors, and it's not medical advice or anything like that, but our recommendation is to people, unless you're on something that's been prescribed to you that your doctor says that you absolutely need, try going off a bunch of stuff and see if you don't feel better for a
Yeah.
change.
Try it out. Even with something like caffeine, I mean, caffeine, the most widely consumed psychoactive substance in the world. And I do this dance with it where I'm on it for a while and enjoy it and really enjoy it. And then, I'm like, all right, it's been enjoying it too much and take a break. And I'm always astonished that, when I do take a break from caffeine, it's like the positive impacts of it are so obvious. Like I just feel so much better and my body works so much better, and it's just one of those things. But then I go back on caffeine and I realize that, oh, it has advantages as well. There's things I like about it. There's things that,
That's interesting. Yeah, I agree. It's a little bit of a dance.
you know, um, what did I want to, oh yeah. You talked just about pulling away from the conversation. And for me, it's I almost like I didn't want to pull away from the conversation. I fought pulling away from the conversation or acknowledging that I was pulling away from the conversation for a long time, like several years. And it wasn't that I was pulling away from the conversation. It was more to me, it was like um, none of the problems that I was trying to solve in the world by awakening people or informing people or this and that were helping me. None of the things that I was sharing with other people, like none of the work of participating in all of that truth telling and whatnot, quote unquote, wasn't helping me. I wasn't at peace, you know.
Hmm.
I dealt with alcoholism and drug addiction and all that kind of stuff. And even when I got that stuff out of my life, like I wasn't at peace. And so what I realized is that when I finally sort of found my peace, I just didn't have anything to say, man. Like I didn't have anything to say to anybody. I lost interest in what was probably the shadow recruiting, right? I lost interest in trying to convince other people that we all need to rally and do something about things. We all need to feel a certain way, and there's a tremendous freedom in that, and not participating in the dichotomy of everything, So
Absolutely. It's been one of my biggest recommendations to people in my articles and materials and interviews is just to stop engaging it, stop looking for new things to listen to. Even this is going to sound really weird because I'm a former educator, but I just I don't know what we're here to learn on a factual level. I don't know that any of it matters. I don't know that any of it can be proven. I don't know that any of it can't be debunked. So the most
Yep.
important thing is to do the inner work of feeling better and to pragmatically self-assess your progress.
Yep.
This is all we can really do. We are kind of in a bit of a dark world where a lot of things are not very clear to us. And I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way, but it's a challenging environment. I tend to think of it much more as a classroom than a prison. I know that that's a huge argument that people have, and I'm sorry if that triggers you, but that's how I see it. It's how John Keats saw it. He called this a veil of soul making. It's how a lot of people see it. A lot of people like William James, see this as a place where we're learning to become better avatars of ourselves. So that's how I approach all of this. But in so doing, if I spent as much time as I once did worrying about the things that I used to worry about and quote unquote learning the things I thought I was learning, I wouldn't have the time or energy to focus on the what I think of as the all important inner work.
Hmm. One of my teachers referred to this place as a cauldron of the souls one time, and that always stuck with me.
Cauldron of the soul. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Definitely a crucible. It's a refiner's fire. We are here to, be melted, smelted, whatever, and then fused into some kind of, harder alloy, spiritually speaking. I really believe this is part of the process, and it's a massive challenge, and it's also a really big opportunity. I've talked a lot about the whole, breakdown and breakthrough dynamic, and that's what we're living right now.
Hmm. Yeah, you talk about looking at this place as a classroom or prison, and for guys like me, I don't have any choice. It's a classroom. I don't have any choice, and I come across this a lot. It's just the experience I've had with coaching people over the last few years have been just so impactful to me and helpful to me on my journey. But because I learn in reflection when I'm working with people. But I had this conversation. I've had it many times with many clients. It's like, well, like the way that you're looking at your life and the situations in your life. A lot of times it's relationships, familial relationships, spouses, sisters, whatever, parents, whatever. The way that you're looking at it is appeasing your ego, right? It's looking at it from your ego's perspective. And there's always this sense of like trying to find justice. Like you have to find justice. You need to be treated fairly by others. You need to be treated with respect. You need to be treated, differently. You deserve more from life and from the people in your life. And it's this, again, it's this energy, this consciousness of desire, which leads to so much frustration. And then, of course, anger and resentment, which just locks people into these repetitive negative loops like we're talking about. And so the conversation is always about, well, okay, well, which way do you want me to coach you in this situation? Like getting out of the situation completely, like saying, hey, this is BS. I'm done with this. I'm moving on with my life, or really like doing the inner work of taking full responsibility. And so, usually when I present that to people, their higher mind jumps right in and says, yeah, of course, I want to take the high road. I want to take responsibility. I want to learn from this experience and be a better person and see if I can't navigate this to create the outcome that I really seek to create, which is harmony in my relationships and in my life. But it's a very difficult struggle often for folks to accept that it's not a personal attack, to accept that it's not a failure of justice if they say, okay, well, how can I show up differently? It's not this unfair game of them having to take all the responsibility. It's them seizing the opportunity to learn from life. It's just taking freaking advantage of what's being given to you so that you can dig out more pearls from your soul, right? And so that it's once people overcome that, once they realize that, okay, cool, it doesn't matter what's happening externally, it's my approach, my reaction, my response to everything that's happening, and that's what I have control over. I don't have control over anything else. So whether it's geopolitics or politics of the household, like the sincerest way to control or steer that dynamic is through your own inner peace, your own just like taking back your power, like you said, and just basically like staying true to what really matters, which is, and I've been through the AA program and stuff, and it's like that sobriety. And so in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's about sobriety from alcohol, but in life, it's about sobriety, emotional sobriety. To always guard that treasured pearl of sobriety, that even keel, that stability. That's what'll lead them in the direction that they want to go, and what will naturally and energetically just compel everyone that is in their lives to just go along with it. Like they follow along. You have so much more control over people when you lead the way versus when you try to tell them how it is and how it should be. Totally different way of looking at the world.
Mm, mm. Oh, I like so many of the things you said. I agree with your perspectives, and I found them beautifully expressed. The idea that, you become a leader by leading yourself
Right, right, right.
is really spot on.
Well, Saul, it's been super cool talking with you today, man. I really appreciate your time, and I wasn't sure where this conversation was going to go, but I got a feeling you're one of those guys I could sit down with on the back porch and stay up till the sunrise comes.
Absolutely. You remind me of friends that I had growing up in that neck of the woods, and we did some of those types of things. Even in the wintertime, I remember
Oh my God.
a few years younger, but I was a precocious, eighth or ninth grader, and my friends were a few years older, and I would go stay at their house in the wintertime, and we would go out and wrap up, and go out sometimes and just lie down on the in the middle of the snow and ice covered road, looking
Nice.
at the sky, and just talking for just hours. It was just an amazing thing. And what we talked about was stuff like this. Just it was philosophy. It was, what we thought about the world, how the world worked, maybe sharing some of our dreams and that kind of thing. But a lot of it was really deep diving discussions, and we were just kids.
Yeah.
So that's
Oh
what this
man.
reminded me of, and that's
It's
maybe there's something in the Blue Ridge Mountains that lends itself to that. I don't know.
I don't know, I think it's maybe like something, greater than that, like a seeker DNA, right? An old soul, perhaps, maybe
Yeah,
that's what it
maybe,
is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I've thought about that a lot too, and I think there's probably something to that.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to add to this awesome conversation, Saul?
Yeah, let's do it again.
Okay. All right.
This is
For
fun.
sure. That's check out saulluckman.substack.com. I am Dylan Charles. You can find my coaching work at dylancharlescoaching.com, and also tons of articles about all kind of things enlightening at wakingtimes.com. And that's what we got for you folks. Peace and power to you.